Hello and welcome to this NBA preview Palooza edition of the group chat. Joining me, Big Waz, Rob Mahoney. I am Justin Verrier. We are here to talk about the contenders for the 2022 NBA title. Isn't this exciting? We're finally here. We're going to run through the favorites and then get into some of our sleepers. I think any conversation for the title begins with one team, and that is the Charlotte Hornets. No, I'm kidding. It is the Brooklyn Nets. We're going to make the case for and case against some of these teams. The case for the Nets seems pretty simple, but you want to make it anyways?
They just have the most talent by far. And it's not just that they have a lot of talent. And I think one of these teams we're going to talk about is also talent rich, but the pieces don't quite as seamlessly as the Nets' pieces do, right? The minute that James Harden got to town and Kyrie Irving publicly stated James is our point guard, that basically unlocked the Nets to be every single scary, horrifying scenario that we envisioned when they made the Harden trade. And so offensively, you have James Harden as the maestro and as secondary ball handler and playmakers. You have Kevin Durant. I mean, that's just absurd offensively. It's to the point where it's not even worth talking about. They're going to score a bunch of points. Joe Harris spreading out, Blake Griffin nominally as the center with LaMarcus Aldridge and others playing spot minutes. They just built to score against any defense you want to throw out there. You want to switch, they have some of the best one-on-one guys in the league. You want to play conventional pick and roll, that's in a lot of ways even worse. There's just nothing you can actually do against this team defensively to neutralize them. And I think in the postseason, they showed, because we did, hipsters like us, when the trade was made, was like, yeah, but how's Harden and Kyrie?
But what about the defense?
Yeah. We thought we were so fucking smart when we said that when the trade first happened. But they showed in the playoffs. Playoff time, KD's a different type of defender. Blake Griffin was a different type of defender. These guys just played hard, dug in, executed assignments. They just have to be your favorite going into the season.
Yeah, how insane is it that they may be down a top 15, top 20 player for who knows how long, maybe the whole season, and they're still the favorites. They're still the convincing favorites to win the title.
That's the question, right? Because if we're going to make the case against, it's whether or not one of those three dynamic offensive Hall of Fame caliber players.
What happened to him?
I don't know if you've heard this or not, but he hasn't accepted the vaccine shots, and it doesn't look like, despite the Nets' expectation that he would, it doesn't seem like that's happening anytime soon. We're recording this about a week or so in advance, live to tape, baby. This is 2021. Get with the future. But I think we could probably safely guess that Kyrie didn't have the vaccine by this point. I think, Rob, you asked the really important question though. Like, if they don't have Kyrie, are they still overwhelming favorites for the title?
I think as long as KD and Harden are healthy, they are. As long as those two guys are out there, that's just two tent poles for all kinds of execution, all kinds of options offensively. The idea that you could have James Harden around to run your second unit offense, like, no team has that luxury. No team has that kind of firepower. So if you have those two guys and the rest of their roster, while imperfect in some ways, has a lot of flexibility, a lot of options, a lot of situations where, if Paul Millsap doesn't have it going, he's just not going to play. And they're going to plug in Blake Griffin and LaMarcus Aldridge and Nick Claxton. And now they have Patty Mills, who can, stabilize some of their backcourt play. I think you could argue maybe they're like one more good wing player away. And maybe that's something they pick up down the line in the season. But other than that, this is pretty close to like an open and shut finals case, certainly, and probably a championship case too, if all goes according to plan.
So if it isn't injuries, if it isn't Kyrie, what can hold them back, Waz? Is it, like Rob's saying, is it just like maybe a rotation spot or two? Or do you think it's maybe one of these other teams has a better chance against the Nets without a Kyrie, or maybe an injury strikes?
I think there were moments in the Bucks series, especially later on in the series, where they played a kind of defense where they did make Brooklyn do everything in the one-on-one, and we saw how taxing that was on KD, right? Like, if a team can put out enough quality wing defenders while also having enough sophistication in their scheme that they don't just switch everything. Somebody sets, one quarter worth of a screen and they switch, and all of a sudden the Bucks at certain points in the series were executing in ways where like, no. PJ Tucker, you're not switching off of KD every time. Or you're not coming off of this pin down and using the switch. Like, if they face a team that has the know-how as far as when to execute a proper switch and the defensive talent to sort of stop them when they do, or make it tougher, because you're never going to stop KD or a healthy James Harden or Kyrie for that matter. If they run into a team like that, then they'll have some problems because their defense isn't going to be stout. It's going to be good enough, right? In so far as their offense is so elite. But to me, that's the only thing.
Yeah, and that's why there's like one compelling reason why they may not win, and it's Giannis. Right. If Giannis is as dominant and as consistently dominant as we saw from basically the middle of that Brooklyn series on throughout the playoffs, the Nets don't have an answer for that. Nobody has an answer for that.
Well, what a perfect segue, because let's talk about the Bucks now. I think their case for and against is kind of the playoffs, right? If you believe that they overcame adversity, that they figured something out in the playoffs, that Giannis took a leap, that Drew Holiday settled into enough of a role while still missing 30 shots a game, then yes, that I could see the case for the Bucks. The counter, of course, is maybe they just got lucky. Maybe a couple of the best teams in front of them just got injured at the right time. Rob, I know your answer. So, Waz, where do you fall on that spectrum?
I'm closer to the Bucks are really super duper good and not extremely lucky. Although they were very lucky.
Welcome, Waz.
They were very lucky last year, but I think this is the thing about the Bucks. If you were watching them as closely as the three of us were last playoffs, there were times where they were just not playing up to the talent on the actual roster on both ends of the floor. They weren't executing offense at a level they were so obviously capable of. There was some boneheaded Drew Holiday moments. There was some terrible Giannis stuff in the very early on, right? So I think the Bucks were not those times where they were playing really bad against Brooklyn. They weren't playing up to their capabilities, right? And so they're a team that was even better than they showed for large chunks of last year's playoffs. And so that's why I think they corrected it as they went on too, which is to say more Giannis switching out on guys. There were times when Giannis was switching out on people like Trae Young, people like Chris Paul on the perimeter when he was playing center. It was flat out scary, right? It was, and you could see it in Chris Paul and Trae Young's hesitancy to even do anything, where they were commanding space on offense, and then Giannis gets out on them out to 30 feet, and they're like, okay, what am I supposed to do with this freaking animal on me, right? And so that's why I think the Bucks, I err on that experience that they gained and just the collective talent that they're going to be able to play closer to more consistently this next playoffs. Yeah, the Bucks are firmly a contender.
It's easy to forget too. They experimented with a lot of different stuff during last regular season to the point that, talking to the players on their team during that time, they weren't sure what was going to work and what wasn't. They were kind of, checking their bases, making sure they had all these options when the playoffs came around, and we saw them switch and drop and try a lot of different defensive switches and coverages. But now they're kind of ingrained in those things. They've seen the processes that work. So they may do a similar kind of format in terms of how they approach the regular season, do a little of this, little of that. But there's more confidence in knowing that if we just do these things right, we're a championship team.
Right. Are you worried at all, Rob, about the loss of PJ Tucker, and specifically the loss of everyone caring about or pretending to care about his shoes and all that throughout the course of a regular season? Or do you think that they made up enough with the Grayson Allen types, with the Rodney Hood types, to potentially not have to worry about that?
I mean, I think it's the combination of those two things, which is not only are they losing PJ Tucker, but they remade a lot of their bench. And so you're getting back Dante DiVincenzo, who was missing from some crucial series. That's important.
Bucks fans tell me he was very that was a huge blow. They never stopped talking to me about that.
When you bring back Bobby Portis, which is obviously crucial for them. But otherwise, it's can we get something from Grayson Allen, as you mentioned, Justin? Can we get something from Semi Ojeleye or Rodney Hood or George Hill's coming back? Maybe these guys matter, maybe they don't. I think the core of the team like the synergy between their three stars, that's something you can win a title off of. Everything else, they're going to have to figure out on the fly in terms of what can work for this new version of the Bucks.
And what matters too is the matchup against the Nets. When you talk about those three guys, Drew Holiday, Chris Middleton, Giannis Antetokounmpo, these are three plus two insanely plus defenders, right? And that matters against Brooklyn when you do have to switch guys out, when Drew Holiday is going to have to spend time on KD and James Harden and Kyrie and vice versa for the other two guys. Like, matchup-wise for the Nets, it's going to matter in a way like, and I know we're going to talk about the Lakers, like they don't have that versatility defensively on the wing. And so the Bucks, you got to take them seriously.
And that's the difference between these two conferences is in the East, the Nets are just so overwhelming that you can talk yourself into them over a championship team in the Bucks, a really, really good team. In the West, if you're saying the Lakers are going to come out of the West, it's almost by default just because the conference is kind of messy, kind of uneven. There's a void, there's a vacuum there that there just isn't in the East.
Yes, which is exactly why I would put the Bucks on the same tier as the team we're going to talk about next, which is the Los Angeles Lakers. They had quite the offseason. I'm still trying to wrap my head around the plan there, because on the one hand, you have LeBron James and you have, in theory, a motivated Anthony Davis and you have a motivated Russell Westbrook. So there could be something good there on that alone, right? Especially in a regular season where, as we saw last season, they really struggled through injuries and whatnot just to make it to that playing game. On the other hand, I don't have much confidence in much else going on there. In particular, all of these wings who magically will just turn into KCP playoff version clones in an instant. And so, Rob, where are you on the Lakers? Do you think they have as good a shot as the Bucks? Do you think that they're on a tier below? Do you where do you kind of place them in the hierarchy?
I mean, I would say I'm down on them, relatively speaking. I have a lot of questions about this team. And as we've talked about, their ability to match up in playoff series, their ability to have, not only the first adjustment, but the second and the third and the fourth adjustment that gets you through 7 games. I don't know that this group of personnel has that. So I don't think they're as good a team as the Bucks, flat out. And so on those grounds, I would put the Bucks in kind of closer to the Nets, kind of in their own tier, the Lakers in that next group. And some of that is every LeBron James team is a LeBron James team. The whole organization is remade in his image. And at the same time, every Russell Westbrook team kind of becomes in his orbit. So how those two things clash and mesh and make sense, I don't know yet, but I have a lot of questions about that before we even get to the next level of who their fourth and fifth guys are in some of these lineups.
So is Malik Monk going to be forced to dress like Marty Jannetty? Is that what you're saying, since the Lakers might take on Westbrook's image? No, that's a great point. And what I do want to say is, because I talked about the Nets being the most talented group of the bunch, I think if you stacked up Westbrook, LeBron, and AD next to KD, Harden, and Kyrie, the talent is not that far apart. I think it's pretty close. If you really think about it, the difference is the synergy, the complementary ways in which Harden, Kyrie, KD make sense in ways that Russ and LeBron just so obviously don't. Their games are not complementary of one another. In fact, they are very redundant, right? And so that's the thing that I think is going to plague the Lakers, is figuring out a hierarchy of possession management, of who does what when, and then refiguring it out again in the playoffs. Whereas I don't think the Nets or the Bucks have to do any of that work. And that's before we even talk about the defensive component, which again, in the regular season, I'm not worried about, because Vogel is the 2 years he's been LA, they've been the best defense in the NBA. Right. And I think so long as you have Anthony Davis, you're going to be close to that level in the regular season. The problems you run into is in the playoffs, when it is matchup dependent. And, Kendrick Nunn is trying to guard Kevin Durant. That's when it becomes all right, what are we doing here? Where your team is dependent on Trevor Ariza to be one of your best perimeter defenders, that's when it gets to be kind of dicey. But I don't think those answers will have to be, addressed until the playoffs.
Well, are we even sure this is going to be an elite regular season defense when they're finding minutes for Melo and Kendrick Nunn and Wayne Ellington. And I mean, Trevor Ariza, I guess, will theoretically be healthy at some point, but even he's getting up there in age. LeBron is going to take it at whatever speed he wants to this season. Oh, and Russell Westbrook, maybe, a guy who doesn't get criticized enough for just completely falling asleep on defense, but very much does all the time.
Yeah, it's almost like they overcorrected based on what happened last season. So they made all these additions in order to get them through the regular season. Now you have all of these bigs who will play a role, and you could slide Anthony Davis over to 4 more in the regular season. You just have a deep bench of guys that you can kind of cycle through. Russell Westbrook will take the reins sometimes by force, sometimes when LeBron James is actually not playing. But in the playoffs, I think you guys make a really big point. And just to circle back to before, like they got a lot of plaudits for all of these wings they got for veteran minimums, and deservedly so. There's some intriguing guys, some young guys with upside. Malik Monk, Wayne Ellington is a guy that people seem to have high opinions of for some reason, although I get very Jody Meeks Lakers vibes from this guy.
Come on.
I'm just saying. But I think there's a lot of pressure on Vogel to turn some of these guys not into shooters or defenders, but 3-and-D type of guys, because their best lineup is going to be with AD at the 5, and they're going to want to do that more and more often in the playoffs, just like they did when they won the title. And so like something needs to happen there, because right now they have options. They need to turn those options into real 3-and-D players. And I'm still a little like on the fence of whether or not that's like actually going to happen.
Yeah, I think of guys like Kuzma. I think of guys like Schroeder. Kuzma at least had the size and the length to deal with certain kinds of people. But the point being, before Vogel, nobody thought of them as defensively competent guys at all. And Vogel got them in there, and I'll be damned if Dennis Schroeder wasn't chasing guys full court, keeping guys in front, like executing a defensive scheme, right? I think Vogel has kind of earned the benefit of the doubt at this point on the defensive end. And so, yes, Malik Monk is tiny. He's never had a defensive reputation. None, God bless him. He comes out of the Miami Heat organization where he tries. But again, he's pretty light in the shorts, isn't tall, isn't thick. Like, I don't know how they're going to get to a point where they're guarding very big, very good NBA wings. But I'd like to give Vogel the chance to try to make it happen.
Best defense in the league last regular season, I should point out, despite the fact that they had all those injuries and no LeBron, no AD for long stretches.
Well, and the wild card there will be if Anthony Davis is in a space where he's not getting the ball as much between Westbrook and LeBron, is he going to be totally engaged? I'm gunning for Defensive Player of the Year, Anthony Davis, or is he going to be kind of floating around Anthony Davis?
Yeah, and historically, we've seen Anthony Davis is at his best.
I was waiting for this.
He's at his best following a season where he completely underperformed. I guarantee he's going to be so much better this year. So we'll see what happens there. I will say, though, like it's not a bad blueprint to basically say, just get LeBron a high seed in the playoffs and see what happens, because that's happened like over the past decade and a couple years here. That's literally been the formula for most of the finals teams that we've seen. All right, let's talk about the teams that aren't the top 3, because I think the top 3 is kind of solidified, at least in conventional wisdom, if not perhaps on the Zoom call, Rob. So let's talk about the teams who have the best chance that aren't among this trio. If you had to pick one, my friend Robert, who would you pick?
Oh, I don't have to pick one. I am picking one. I think the Suns are going back to the NBA Finals.
Oh, wow.
And I think this probably has more to say about me than it does the Phoenix Suns. But I just don't trust the construction of the Lakers fundamentally. And when I look at the Suns, I see a team that never beats itself, that executes its stuff, that is rock solid, low turnover, knows how to wear you down over the course of the series through competence, through not making mistakes. That's the kind of team I can see navigating series after series, in part because we just saw it. So I think I think we have to account for the fact that Chris Paul, by his age, may be a little more injured, maybe a little less effective. I think all those things are in play. But between Booker and Mikal Bridges and DeAndre Ayton and Cam Johnson, there's a lot of upside there. There's a lot of room for this team to be even more explosive in a way that I just trust more. I trust the floor of that team more than I trust the floor of the Lakers.
Yeah, I'm not even mad at that. I think a lot of my bias does come from the fact that they played nothing but ridiculously injured teams all playoffs, right? Like that's shaded how I think about the Suns. But when I do think about it, because like my pick is the Jazz, right? And, if you really break it down, like, Donovan Mitchell probably better than Devin Booker, or definitely better. I think we would all assume. But Chris Paul is a better version of what Mike Conley's doing. And Ayton at this point might be, especially in the postseason, a better version of what Rudy Gobert does.
Be careful, Woz.
I'm just saying. I don't know. There's something about the Jazz and Donovan Mitchell that I just cannot quit. I just really believe in his potential to be an explosive, series-defining, series-changing type of player in a 7-game series. And I do love their continuity. As toxic as it's been in Utah over the past 3 years, and some people might say, oh, they must be sick of each other. I love that these guys have played with each other for like 4 or 5 years now straight. Like, I think that counts for something, particularly on the margins when it comes to executing at, like, you got this much room for error, right? Like, so that's why I really like the Jazz coming into the season. Like Anthony Davis, who embarrassed himself last year with his effort in the regular season, I think the Jazz had that in the playoffs. And they're coming in with a chip on their shoulder, and they got a lot to prove. And I love the Rudy Gay pickup that people, sleep on. $6 million. That was a really good pickup. I like Eric Paschall. I like that pickup. I just hope, and I know this hasn't been the case for years now, I just hope if Mike Conley could be relatively healthy, man, just the ability to score is going to be there, and defense is going to matter, until they play teams that spread them out and just start picking them apart.
Well, but let it be known that on this podcast, we are believers in toxic continuity. Absolutely.
Certainly. Yeah, I mean, Rudy Gobert pretty much just turned Terrence Mann into a playoff legend. Like,
all right, okay.
We're already talking about him as like an MIP candidate, etc.
Here's the thing I want to say, because I've been harsh on Rudy Gobert. What happened against the Clippers was not Rudy Gobert's fault.
You're going to say the wing defense.
It was really bad, though.
That's what it was.
It was really bad. Like, what is he supposed to do? If Terrence Mann is nailing corner threes, what is he really supposed to do, right? Like, the scouting report is to let him shoot. I cheat to the paint. Guys, like, Reggie Jackson was doing one move, one dribble through his legs, and straight into the teeth of the defense. Like, at a certain point, you got to supply some kind of resistance. Make that kick out a little bit difficult. These guys were getting Ginsu knifed, man. And and I'm not a Rudy Gobert apologist, but that in particular, like, because Reggie Jackson was looking like the second coming out there.
Yeah, okay, so I have two counters to that. One, this is now like the 4th year something like this has happened to Rudy Gobert. There's enough evidence in the playoffs at this point to say, like, yeah, it was just the wing defense, but maybe it's also a little bit of Rudy Gobert being a fucking like Godzilla out there, not being able to move against a modern NBA offense. And two, how did their wing defense get any better? Like, it's still practically the same team. It's not, like, you can't blame that on Mike Conley and Donovan Mitchell's injuries alone, because Mitchell's not like a lockdown defender and Conley's just getting older and older every year. So I don't know, like, is Rudy Gay enough, like, to give them a different look? Rob, like, do you think that, like, some of the changes that they made them like kind of short up those things? Or are you still concerned about some of what bit them in the playoffs pretty much?
I mean, I'm still concerned about it, but I think their problems were exacerbated by playing the Clippers. Like, that specific opponent is really tough for them. And, maybe Rudy Gay does finish a lot of games against smaller teams. That's something that's very much in the cards. And maybe between that and, I know you were poo-pooing it, but Conley and Mitchell being a little healthier, maybe they're at least not giving up, again, one step blow-bys to the Reggie Jacksons of the world. That's a meaningful difference. So I'm still not totally sold on their defense, but their offense is going to be good. Their execution is going to be good. And I'm a Donovan Mitchell believer, absolutely. Like, he is the real deal in terms of a playoff performer, a guy who could just carry you over the top against really good teams. And so the fact that you have that alone puts you in a position to beat some really good teams in the West potentially.
And I will say, because I can't get out of a podcast without ripping Rudy Gobert, to me, the problem is Patrick Beverley's guarding you on the other end with no fucking problem. That's your real problem, Utah Jazz fans, is that on offense, he can never punish a switch when teams go small. That to me is Rudy's problem, not that he was getting cooked on the defensive end.
Yeah, and I will say the formula that the Jazz have put together is really hard to bet against. Like, you just have the most dominant defender, rim protector in the world. Just station him by the basket. And then you have 4 just plus 3-point shooters to bomb away and like break records. Like the math is just like so much in their favor. And so you wonder, like, you could easily write it off, even despite what we've all been saying about them. Like maybe matchups go a different way. Like they can easily make it through. The case for, go ahead.
Just think about, like, I mean, as bad as the Clippers were as a matchup, think about if they played the Lakers in a playoff series. All the guys on the Lakers who are trying to get to the rim, it's a very different thing if Rudy Gobert is able to anchor himself down there. All of a sudden, AD is having a much more perimeter-oriented game. Westbrook could be pretty stifled depending on how that matchup breaks out. It really just does depend on who they play. And against some teams, Gobert could be the best or the second best player in a playoff series just with defensive impact if the matchups break right.
Yep. All right. Let's turn now to the sleepers. Kind of the more fun picks we have here. So outside of the teams we've mentioned here, the 5 that we've mentioned, Woz, is there a team that you're eyeing that might be able to break through this field and maybe surprise some and make it to the title or even win it?
I just can't quit the team that was light years ahead 4 years ago. You feel me? The
Hawks,
league is just now catching up to the Golden State Warriors. No, I'm kidding. I honestly can't shake the feeling of what it felt like to watch them curb stomp the freaking Trailblazers in 2019 without KD and put the Scaries into Toronto basically up until Klay Thompson got hurt. The last time I saw Draymond, Steph, and Klay play together, they were playing at a championship caliber level, right? Granted, that was 2 years ago. That was a Klay Thompson ACL and Achilles tear ago. I'll grant you all of those caveats, but man, like I can't shake the feeling of what it felt like viscerally to watch, them shed the KD skin and be like, oh snap, we're back to being the old Warriors. And like, it was so crazy to watch that in 2019. Like what they did to the Blazers is like, it's underrated. They just smoked them. They just creamed them in 4 games. And it was just like, it was embarrassing what they did to them. And then again, they carried it through to the finals. So that team, what I watched them do together, both in the 2015 and 2015 championship and the 2016 73-9 season, they ended up losing the championship. But watching them produce that magic, it's hard for me to leave them out of this group of sleeper contenders.
They're a team you want to believe in just by like the mechanics involved, the players involved, the skill sets involved.
This is my heart talking to me.
Well, I have to say, I mean, watching them in the preseason and watching 2 defenders fly at Otto Porter, leaving Steph Curry wide open, it's kind of jarring. It's kind of jarring to see in a way that makes you, again, want to believe the fact that if they keep moving the ball like this, and now they have better veterans to do that, maybe they can get back to some of that play.
Right. And they have all these young guys who I think are one of the best cases you can make against them, that they have to work in. Jonathan Kuminga, Moses Moody, James Wiseman when he's healthy. They have to find a balance between development and actually winning a title. But on the other hand, like they could easily just roll these guys into a trade package and all of a sudden they're playing next to Bradley Beal and he's the one getting 3 defenders on him instead of 1 Otto Porter. Rob, who is your pick as a sleeper?
I just have a vision of hyper competent Denver Nuggets basketball for 60 games. And then Jamal Murray coming back last 10, 15, 20 games of the season, looking pretty good. Maybe not fully himself, but pretty good. And I think that could be a really good team. I think if everybody was healthy, I don't think we'd be talking about the Lakers as a potential finals team, or even necessarily the Suns or the Jazz. I think the Clippers fully healthy, and I think the Nuggets fully healthy. Those are probably the 2 best teams in the Western Conference. And considering the Nuggets are a little closer to that point, I just have more faith that Jamal might get back this season versus Kawhi. I think that could be the team that makes it out of the West. But longer road, longer rehab, a lot of caveats implied in that. But I think they've got a shot.
Yeah, you never know with Michael Porter Jr. He could take them to another level, or he could be out for 20 games for a non-injury, let's call it. Last team I would bring up here is the Heat. They have one PJ Tucker, the guy from the reigning title contender. And while they're old, they're really old, and I am a little worried about the spacing with both Jimmy Butler and Bam and PJ on that team, especially if PJ Tucker's only going to take one shot a game. Like, they just have the institutional knowledge, and the defense is going to be incredible. I also wonder, Duncan Robinson, what is it, year 3, if he can just like alleviate all of those concerns on the shooting end of things. And then Jimmy Butler is just proven, you put him in the playoffs, well, most years, and he's just going to take the team to another level. Among this group of teams, like, who do we think realistically would have the best chance? Do we think it's the Warriors just because of their upside, or do you go with a team like the Heat who have a little bit more of a steady floor to them?
To me, I would make it the Warriors, because I think the Warriors are closer to the Lakers than the Heat are to the Nets and the Bucks. I really do feel that way. And the Nuggets, I like the Nuggets, but I don't think they're going to bring Jamal Murray back this year.
They may not. They may play that really slow.
I think they're going to do the conservatism stuff. They've invested in the team. You know, everybody's under contract. They're going to...
They're not going to pay their taxes. Yeah.
They're going to want to... The Cronkies end up on the Pandora Papers.
Yeah.
But I think they're going to want to see what this actual core does, because they paid for it. They're going to want to see it. They're not going to want to jeopardize that by bringing the guy back early. And I think if the GM has any, especially when you're the GM, people don't think about decisions enough through job security and cynicism. If I'm the GM of the Nuggets, I don't want Jamal Murray coming back. If the season goes whatever, I got that in my pocket. That was Jamal Murray-less season. No, Jamal, take your time. Come back next year. Another year of GMing for me. This is a free year GMing for me. I might as well. I don't even have to work this year. You know, and so that's why I don't think Jamal Murray's coming back.
Like a true conservative. That's right. All right. That is it for us. Thank you for joining us on this special edition of Group Chat. Enjoy the rest of NBA Preview Palooza. Drink fluids. We'll see you next time.